So in this video, I'd like to show you how to use xLights to configure a Hinkspix Pro, and in particular, the Smart series of receivers, the Smart 4, Smart 16, and the Smart 16 AC. The Hinkspix Pro is part of Holiday Quarrel's Flex system, indicating that this can come in several different configurations. This is probably one of the most common configurations with a single long-range expansion board and 16 local SPI ports. And as you can see, there's nothing installed in the third expansion slot, although you can install another long-range or local board if you so choose. The long-range expansion is what allows you to start to use the differential receivers, and the differential receivers allow you to use a Ethernet cable to place a receiver quite a ways away from the main controller. And the receivers that are available are the original normal or dumb receiver, indicating you cannot daisy chain these from one to the other. And in fact, if you're using these, there's no special configuration that's really required within xLights. Each port on the receiver corresponds to the logical port that you're plugged into. And in fact, if you're using a single smart long-range receiver, as long as the dip switches are as they come from the factory, all down in board ID 0 mode, again, no special configuration is required. But the smart board is what allows you to start to daisy chain these. So you would use a single Ethernet cable from the expansion, run to your first board, and then from that board you would run to another one, and so on. And you could do this where you'd have 16 of these 4-port boards in a line. I think an important concept to understand is, since you're coming off of a single output port which contains 4 ports, although you add more boards and you gain physical ports, you're not gaining logical ports. So this chain of receivers is always going to be using ports, in this case 13 through 16. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe when we get into the visualizer with xLights, I'll try and reiterate that concept. The other smart board that's available is this 16-port board. And this is basically like having 4 of these individual boards smashed together in one board. Typical uses are like Omega Tree or something like that. And then the other one that's available, which I don't have a picture of here, is a 16-port AC board for controlling your AC props, blow-ups, whatever you want to use for that. All right, so what do we need to get this going? So in order to be able to configure this, you need version 2021.28 of xLights or newer. In this case, I'm at 2021.38. That's the most current version as of the date of this video. And then on your Hinkspix, let me get to it. You need to make sure that your CPU version is version 102 or higher. And in this case, firmware 105 is the most current. If you need to update, all you need to do is connect your controller to the internet. As soon as you boot it, it will go out to the internet, see if a firmware update is available. If one is available, it will automatically install it, and you can come back to this status screen and check to make sure that you're on the most current firmware. All right, so in xLights, on the layout, I've put some models in here together to illustrate just a typical simple layout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the Hinkspix up here by the house, and I'm going to use the local ports to control the roof outline, the door outline, and these 2 windows. And I think I'll daisy chain these props together. Then from the long range receiver, I'm going to run an Ethernet cable out here, and I'm going to run a Smart 4 to control the candy canes. And since we're already out in the yard, I'm going to come off of this Smart 4 and daisy chain over to another Smart 4 to run the arches. And since we're out here again, I'm just going to come off of this 4 and then go to a Smart AC. And then what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a 16 port board off of another port on the Hinkspix long range expansion to control the megatree and the star. And since I'm going to have a chain of smart receivers, I'm going to call this the first one. It's going to be the board ID 0, or in xLights we call that an A. And then I'm going to come to the second one, which on the board you would designate that as a 1, or in xLights as a B. I mean, you could start to see the correlation here between how the board's ID corresponds to the way that xLights we'll want to see these called. And the Smart 16 is the third one, so it's going to be number 2, or board C. And since we're going to be coming off of another output port over to this 16, I'm just going to leave that one at 0. Each chain indicating each output port from the long range, well, it can have its own series of board identifiers. And to keep things simple, I'm just going to start back at 0 or A. All right, so let's get back over to xLights. Let's go to our controller tab, and we're going to add our controller. I'm going to call that the HXPix Pro. I'm going to come down here to this vendor field. I'm going to select the Hinkspix, and then the model field. I'm going to select that we have a Pro. This was what tells xLights what our controller is, and xLights contains a database of the different controllers and their capabilities. And then I'm going to give it the IP address of our controller. And as soon as we've done that, we can actually hit the open, and then you can see that we're connected to our controller and talking to it. So to use xLights to configure the controller, what we need to have selected is we need to have this auto layout models. This allows you to use the visualizer to assign your models to your different output ports. And we need to have auto size on. Auto size will automatically configure the number of universes that are necessary for this controller based on the number of pixels that you have attached to it. There's another option down here, this universe per string. And what this will do is xLights will calculate a unique universe for each string port. In this case, we don't need this option for our purposes. The way our layout is, it's pretty straightforward. If you're starting to do multi-string props with other models sort of intertwined in there, you may need to turn this on to get it to work right. And in fact, if you do turn it on, your output ports start to look a little bit more like some of the other training videos that you may have seen from Holiday Coro or Joe Hinkle. But in general, it's more than likely not needed. xLights does a very good job of efficiently packing the universes together to minimize as much network traffic as possible. Okay, now that we have our basic controller information set, we can begin to associate models to this controller, and we do that by using the visualizer. The visualizer is accessed by the button at the bottom. We click visualize. What we end up with is a list of our models on the right. This represents everything that we've placed into the layout. And we see the ports on the Hinkspix over here on the left, all the way down to 48 ports plus a serial port. Now, of course, xLights doesn't know that we don't have the third expansion installed. It just knows that the Hinkspix is capable of up to 48 ports. So I'm going to begin with the local ports that are on there. And for me, that begins with port 17. We can confirm that by accessing the Hinkspix web page, going to port config, and you can see 17 through 32 represents my local SPI ports. 1 through 16 is the long range. You'll want to come in and check this so that you know which ports you need to assign your models to get the results you're looking for. So let's start with our roof outline on the first output there. Our roof outline is here, so all we need to do is grab it, drag it until the port that we want to associate it with turns blue, and let it go. So now our roof outline is associated with port 17. I'll use the next port for the door. Again, drag, drop. And now I'm gonna do the left window first off the controller onto the next port, and then I'm gonna chain from this model over to the right window. A little shortcut for chaining models. You can see that this model is highlighted in a magenta color. All we need to do is come over here, find our next model, double click, and it associates and chains it right there. So, okay. So that's it for the local SPI ports. What we're going to do next is we're going to start with a Smart 4. If you recall, I'm going to use a Smart 4 here off the first output port of the Hinkspix to run a couple candy canes. I'm going to put each candy cane on its own port. So I'm going to use ports 1 and 2 of the first board to run those. So I come back here, I'll put the left candy cane on port 1 and the right candy cane on port 2. Now, if we were running a single board, either an original dumb or normal receiver, or even a single smart receiver in an ID of 0, this is all we would need to do at this point. We're done. No special configuration is required. But because we are going to daisy chain these, we do need to tell xLights that these will be on a board running in smart mode. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to find our first model here. We're going to right click. We're going to come down to smart remote, and we're going to tell xLight that this is the first smart remote in this chain. So you can see it turns green here to indicate that this model is now on a smart receiver. And you may have noticed a message that appears here at the bottom. This is a status window. It will give you either errors or warnings if you're trying to do something up here on your ports which either is not supported or could cause some issues. In this case, what it's telling us is that we have a mixture of smart and non-smart on a particular output port. These colored bands on the side represent the output ports on the long range. You can see ports 1, 2, 3, 4 have a red band, 5, 6, 7, 8 have a green, blue and yellow. And again, that represents each RJ45 port on the expansion. So to clear this message, all we need to do is come to the next one, smart remote, and also tell it that it's on an A board. And now both are green, both are on the first smart receiver, and our error message is gone. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to go from this board. We're going to go to our second 4-port smart that's going to run these arches. I'll put these arches also on the first port. So I'm going to come to my second board here, and I'll just put the arches right here on the first port. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to find my arches. I'm going to come over and I'm going to associate it with port 1. Now, I find the best way to do this is to actually come over until the right half of this model turns blue, and then release it. And you can see it's given it a green color. Right now it's thinking that it's on an A board, but it's not. We're going to be putting this on the second board. So again, all we need to do is right click, come to smart remote, and then tell it it's the second board in the chain, which in this case is a B board. And you can see we get a magenta or purple color that indicates it's on the next board. So this diagram here I put together to hopefully help show how multiple 4-port boards will look in the visualizer. The first board is given a green color, the second the purple, third I don't know what color that is, sort of orangey, and then the fourth board cyan, and the colors sort of repeat as you keep going down the line. And the physical ports on the smart board are here 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see in this case I'm using the second output port, which is actually ports 5, 6, 7, and 8. But hopefully this will help you associate physical port on the smart receiver with the logical port that you're actually associated with. All right, so our arches are now on there. So I'm going to eventually add this 16 port AC receiver also onto this same chain. But for now, I'm going to skip that. We need to do a little bit of additional work in our layout to sort of make this work efficiently. So I'm going to move over to the mega tree and our star, which will be on our second output port of our Hinkspix. And again, if you recall, our second output port is ports 5, 6, 7, and 8. Back to xLights, we see 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are our green band. We come over here, we find our mega tree, and we come over here and we drop that on our first port. Now since I've defined the mega tree as 8 strings in our layout, what xLights has done is it has put our mega tree on 8 consecutive ports. And you can see what we end up with here is we end up spanning 2 long-range expansion ports, which was not what we want. But we need to set a few options to help xLights know exactly how to configure this. So we're going to set a few options, and it's gonna look like not much is happening, but some important variables are being set in the background. So first, we're going to go to our first item here. We're going to access the smart remote. And we're going to come down here, and I'd like to tell it the type of board that this is on. So this is on a 16-port pixel board, so we're going to go ahead and select that. Next, we're going to right-click, and we're going to come down here, and we're going to use this cascade remotes. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned that a 16-port board is actually 4 4-port boards combined. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and choose to cascade this particular model over 4 smart receivers. So the next item that we're going to do is we're going to access the smart remote. And we're going to tell xLights to cascade these down the port. Well, I'm going to do that because what I would like is I would like xLights to associate string 1 with port 1 of the 16 port board, string 2 with port 2, and so on. So I'm going to set this cascade down port option. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to smart remote, and I'm going to tell xLights that this is the first smart remote in this particular receiver chain. And there we go. So we get string 1 with port 1, 2 on 2, and you may notice it's a little different about what's going on here with the 4-port boards. So let's access this little diagram. The way that the 16-port boards work is just a little different. The way that the board is silkscreen, the ports actually go horizontally rather than vertically down. So you can see we got port 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we jump down 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Don't let this confuse you. I don't know, hopefully you'll leave this up here a little while. You can come back to this and use this as a guide. If you're going to put something on, say, port 15, you'll know that, hey, you got to put this on the 4th port, and you got to designate it as the 3rd board in the line. Another method that we could use is a little tooltip pop-up that is in the visualizer here. And you can see at the bottom there, it'll indicate if you're on a 16-port long range that we're hovering over port 1, port 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. And as we would add more models, we'll see that tooltip there update to give us a indication of where we are on that board. All right, so now we're going to add our star. So I'm going to take the star, I'm going to drag it down to this port, which is then going to end up be, port 9. If you recall again here, port 9 is right here. So all I need to do is right click, smart remote, and an A, and then I'd also like to make sure that it knows that it is a 16, and there we go. We know that it's a 16. Now since it's the only model here, and it's not a multi-string model, we really don't need to worry about the cascade remotes or the cascade down ports at this point. Those options really come into play when you have the multi-string models. So that's it for a 16 port long range expansion there. We have additional ports that are available to us if we want to use those down the line, but that's it for now. All we have left here are the models that I put into the layout that I want to put on the 16 port AC board. And so to get those to work, we're going to do a little work in the layout first. So I'm coming back to the layout, and what I'm going to use is I'm going to use this channel block model here to represent our 16 port AC board. So I'll select that, and I'll draw the model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this our 16 port AC. And you can see the channels down here by default is 16, but we actually need to assign 18 channels to this model. The first two channels are control channels, and then the remaining channels will represent our 16 outputs that are available to us. So I'm going to come back to the controllers tab. I'm going to make sure our controller's selected, visualize. Here's our 16 port AC. I go over here and drag this, and then again, since I'm going to put this as the third board in the chain, right click, Smart Remote, C, and you can see that this puts it on the third board, changes the color. Now the other thing I'd like to do is also tell xLight that this is actually a 16 port AC board. So again, I'm going to right click, I'm going to come down to Smart Remote, and I'm going to go to Type, and I'm going to tell xLights that this is a 16 AC. So there we go. So at this point, we could upload to the controller. We would just upload the outputs and it would configure the Hinkspix. But I want to do another step here, and that is to make sure that these models here are overlapping onto this, and that this flood here will represent the first output port. So I'm going to come here and select our flood. I'm going to make sure that at this controller field, we actually say use start channel. I'm going to come down to the start channel, and I'm going to click these three dots, and I'm going to say that this floodlight begins at on our 16 port AC, but it begins at the third channel. So again, I skipped the first two channels, I went to the third and assigned it to channel 3. So any particular port that you're going to use, say you were going to use port 5, all you would need to do is add 2 and set your start channel as 7. Fairly straightforward. So that's it for that flood. I'll put the next flood on the next port. I'll come over here, use start channel, 3 dots. Now I could actually put this at the end of the next flood, and xLights is smart enough to know that that's the next channel, but I'm going to just reiterate that we'll begin it at the 16, skip the first 2, that's port 1, port 4 is the second port. And again, for the blow-ups, let's do that again. Use start channel, select start a model, skip the first 2, go 1, 2, 3. All right, so that's all we really need to do. If you end up doing a check sequence, you'll see that you'll get this probable model overlap error message. That's because the blow-ups and the 2 floods are overlapping onto the 16 port AC. Now, obviously, it's just a warning because we did that on purpose. If you'd like to get rid of this, all we would need to do is select our model, come over here to this shadow model field, tell it it's a shadow model for the 16 port AC. Just do this in order from left to right. Shadow model for 16 AC. Now when we run our check sequence, you can see there's no problems found. All right, I think we're ready to upload. To upload to the controller, there's a single button down here at the bottom, the upload output. When we hit that, we're going to watch the little dialog box, and we're going to watch the bottom left side for status messages. And we're going to hit upload output. You can see it says it's uploading outputs. This may take a little while the first time you do it. If you see the not responding, that's completely normal. Just give it a few moments and it should push everything on up. All right, and the last message, I don't know if you caught it, but it says rebooting the controller, and it says down here now the output upload is complete. So we're going to open the controller. It may not respond because xLights sends a reboot command to the controller to tell it to reset. If your controller responds immediately, you actually might want to go over to the reset menu and reset it. Reset it just means reboot. So ours is not responding, meaning it is rebooting, which is actually very good. It could take about 30 seconds or so for the controller reboot, and here it is. And now you can see now we have several input universes. We can go to our port config. We can check our local. You can see now we have different pixel amounts assigned to the first 3 ports since it's all I used. If we go to the long range, we can now see that we have 2 4-port boards on the first stream, and then a 16-port AC behind those. The second stream, we've got a 16-port board and everything associated with that, and we haven't used the other 2 streams. So that's it. That configured the controller. As I mentioned, if it didn't reboot or if you see some strange behavior, come over to this reset and simply just hit reset. Don't worry, this does not wipe out your configuration. All it does is reboot the controller. So you hit reboot and wait for it to reboot. And as long as your smart receivers and everything are online, as this reboots, the Hinkspix will send out the configuration to those boards to tell them which pixels they need to be listening for in which part of the stream. So there you go. Thanks for listening. Hopefully that was helpful to you, and hopefully you can get your Hinkspix configured.